Welcome to the March 17th, 2025 episode of The Energy Show. I'm energy journalist Markham Hislop, and the working title for today's show is What the Actual Fuck America. Now, look, we don't curse or use profanity on this show. I'm a professional journalist. I interview energy experts from all over the world. This is a family show. We keep it nice and clean. But sometimes we make an exception to the rule to drive home a point. And the point I want our American viewers to understand today is how angry Canadians are at how we've been treated by the Trump administration with threats of annexation and maybe even invasion and on and on and on. So that's what we're going to talk about today. This is really a message for our American viewers. And I'm going to talk about three things. So the first is how economically vulnerable your country is because it's deeply integrated with the Canadian economy. And the assumption is that because the United States is 10 times bigger and you have the most powerful economy in the world, that somehow you can just steamroll over Canada. And I'm going to show you why that's not the case. Second thing is, I spent 5 years in the oil patch, and I was working out of Calgary, but I had to fly down to the United States for 2 weeks out of every month, and I met hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Americans. And I want to talk about my experience of the United States, its people, and the country. And thirdly, we're going to talk about Donald Trump. We need to have a heart to heart, folks. Okay, so let's talk about the how economically vulnerable the United States is to the Canadian economy. And I want to go back to 1988 because that was a very important election for me. U.S. President Ronald Reagan, Canadian Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, they had negotiated a free trade agreement, and the election was called the free trade election. I mean, that's was the primary issue. And I supported free trade. I thought it was a very good idea. Critics and opponents of the deal said at the time, if we become more dependent on the United States, we become more vulnerable. Who could have anticipated Donald Trump? Certainly in 1988, I didn't. But that was since that time, so we're talking almost 40 years now, the two economies have become deeply, deeply integrated. And this is very deliberate. You can look at on the energy side of things, which is what we focus on here. You can look at oil, gas, and electricity. These systems are designed, they're very complex. They are designed primarily to send Canadian raw hydrocarbons, oil and gas, down to the US. And also for the electricity systems, it's even more deeply integrated because we trade back and forth. Less so with oil, though there's some 400 or 500,000 barrels a day that goes into Eastern Canada because it costs too much to ship it from Western Canada, where most of the production is. Nevertheless, but in electricity, the big hydro provinces. So we're talking about BC, Manitoba, and Quebec, and then the nuclear province in Ontario send a lot of electricity down into the US, and we export some, but less. But it's not even just that. It's the grids are integrated. And if you watch yesterday's show with electrical engineer Scott Jansen, he explains how fragile, how I guess that's a good word. We'll call it fragile. Power grids are. You can't have big uh, uh, flows of supply, generation of electricity, or you can't have the shedding of big loads. You have to keep them within a certain frequency and a certain voltage, and or they crash, or they become unstable. You have blackouts, you have brownouts. So the fact of the matter is that on electricity, um, not all provinces, but according to Scott, in Quebec and in BC, where the trade is DC, direct current, not AC, alternating current, it's much easier to shut it off. And if Canada wanted to, we could shut off our exports of electricity, and suddenly there would be a big shortage in the particularly the New York and New England regions, or on the West Coast. So we're talking mostly Washington and California. And maybe your goods would crash, maybe they wouldn't crash, but you certainly have a shortage of electricity, and you would have big problems. and there are economic consequences to that. Now, would we want to do that? Of course, we wouldn't want to do that. I mean, we have spent a lot of years integrating the grids. And not only that, we set up institutions. We set up regulatory institutions, or things like the North American Electricity Reliability Corporation. The whole point of it is to make sure that we don't have grids crash. And NERC looks at Canadian grids, and the U.S. grids, and the flows, and issues warnings or recommendations on how to make sure those grids are reliable all the time. And then there are other regulatory groups, like in the West, there's a Western pool sort of that helps to coordinate amongst all of these. I mean, we really have not only integrated, but we cooperate a lot to make sure that these things all work. And it works very well. It works to both countries' advantage. Don't force us into a position where we have to use that integration to exploit your vulnerability. Now, here's another good one: oil. So, in most of the exports out of Canada are from Alberta, and they come from northern Alberta, the oil sands, and it's ultra heavy sour crude. And this stuff is so thick, it's like peanut butter when you get it out of the ground, that the American refineries have to have special kit, like cokers, so that they can process it. So all of this money was spent decades ago, tens of billions of dollars, to outfit these refineries with this special equipment to process this oil. Why would they do it? Because the heavy crude sells at a discount. There's a differential between the West Texas Intermediate, which is the American benchmark, and the Western Canadian Select, which is the heavy crude benchmark, and it's usually in the $12 to $15 range. So essentially, from the refiner's point of view, he's getting cheap oil, which he then puts through his refinery. And there's about 3.2, 3.3 million barrels a day of heavy that goes down to the US, and then the 4 million altogether when you include production from Saskatchewan and Newfoundland, and some conventional from Alberta. Okay. How does that benefit the American producers? Well, because you've got that 4 million barrels a day coming in from Canada, then producers such as in the Permian Basin, which makes a very, very light sweet crude, then sells that crude into places like Europe, where they get Brent prices, which is the global oil benchmark. So the refineries are buying at a much lower price, maybe 10, 20, 15, $20 lower between Brent and Western Canadian Select. So they buy low, and then they sell their own product high. Now, President Trump says that America is getting ripped off. It's not even that Canada's getting ripped off on this. It's just that the economics of this are advantageous to all parties. The refiners do well. The Canadian producers specialize in very specialized technology, some of the best in the world at doing this, and they have learned how to make very, very profitable businesses at the WCS price. And then the Permian Basin or other producers of light sweet crude, they benefit. I mean, this is a very advantageous relationship to everybody. Why mess with that with tariffs, which is, Trump wants to put a 10% tariff on Canadian oil and gas. It makes no sense. But, the federal Canadian government has not discounted. In fact, they said we are not taking export taxes off the table. And if we want to put a 25% export tax on heavy crude, then sorry, folks, then your gas prices are going to go way up in the Midwest, where you are 100% of your imported oil, Chicago, Detroit, Wisconsin, Illinois, Pennsylvania, 100% of that imported oil comes from Canada. 2.5 million barrels a day. You say, well, we'll just get it from someplace else. Oh, where will you get it from? Because the pipelines run from the north to the south. They don't run south to north, and you don't just reverse them. You have to do a lot of work, costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time to do that. So you can't do it in a short period of time. And if we turn off the tap, or your refineries have much less oil, or if we put on a 25% export tax, which you would pay to the Canadian government, then your prices go up. This makes no sense. We've got a system that works. It works on electricity. It works on oil. You're less vulnerable on the gas side because the U.S. does produce a lot of gas. I don't know that it could replace all of the Canadian imports. And there's certainly be dislocations. There would be, you'd upset the markets and prices would go up probably for a while. But anyway, on oil and electricity, you are vulnerable to what we do, not the other way around. It's the supplier in this case, not the customer who has the power. And we don't have all the power, but we're not without power. Okay, so that's on the vulnerability side. And then there's other things. This show yesterday with Scott, he brought up some stuff that I hadn't even considered. For instance, the Columbia River, which is a major river down into the western United States, the headwaters are in British Columbia, and the regulation or the flow of that river is regulated by a treaty, and they're just in the process of renegotiating it and discussing it. Scott says if we turned off our dams and let the water build up behind the dams and our reservoirs, we could basically run the Columbia River dry. And then downstream, there would be no water for American businesses, for American consumers. And then he said, if we really wanted to get nasty, we could release all of that water at one time and do enormous damage to ecosystems. And now nobody wants to do this. This crazy. No Canadian wants to ruin an American ecosystem or bankrupt businesses or any of that kind of stuff. But when you're talking about annexing Canada as the 51st state, and if you're even there, like a lot of Americans are, particularly the MAGA voters, are talking about invading Canada. If it's war, then it's war, and everything's on the table. Be careful what you wish for, and don't overestimate the power that you have in this relationship. That's my point to the Americans. You are more vulnerable. It's like a husband and wife. We're in a marriage. You want to get divorced, or you want to do something. My metaphor is breaking down here, but the point is you depend on each other. And that means there has to be mutual respect. You have to treat each other well for the marriage to work long term. So far, it's been great. It's, and I'll get to that when I talk about Donald Trump, why it's suddenly not great, but it's worked really well so far. Don't mess with a good thing. Okay, I want to talk about my years in the US. Now, in 2003, I've been in communications and journalism most of my career. But 2003, 2008, I had an opportunity to work with a company in Calgary where we were living, and they make a very specialized oil field tubing product, the only place in the world that was made. And they wanted to get into the U.S. market, and they said, "I don't know how do we do this?" And I said, "Oh, I'll get on a plane and I'll go down to Midland, Texas. You know where the Landman show is located? That place." I went down there and I met a guy named Alan Means. He was an independent oil and gas engineer. It was the only contact we had. And I had a wonderful time. We went out for dinner with him and his wife and got to be really good friends with Alan, went to his place for barbecues, and then he introduced me to a number of other people in Midland. And then I met Mike Truitt, who was one of my, very best friends, and he was worked for a distributor. And the 2 years that I spent going down there 2 weeks out of every month were great. I was treated with so much respect and so well because, I talked funny and I came from somewhere else. And the hospitality was amazing. I have excellent memories of the time that I spent in Texas, and I still keep in touch with Mike and on an occasional basis. And it was great. And then we went up 2 years. After 2 years, I went to California for 3 years, and I worked out of Bakersfield. And I got to know hundreds and hundreds of people in the industry at that time. And I went into Los Angeles, down into Signal Hill and up to Ventura and places like that. And again, met people who were just salt of the earth. Now, did we agree on everything? No. This is the oil patch, right? You know how many lunches I had with people who were card carrying NRA members? Well, a lot. And I am not an NRA member, even though the fact that we had guns in our house and I used to go hunting as a kid and, it was no big deal. But I'm a Canadian. I believe in restrictions on firearms. This works out very well for our country. So we would have spirited discussions over lunch. We would disagree quite strongly and advance arguments for our position, but we were friends. Nobody got upset. Nobody got angry. It was like, Thanksgiving dinner and you're having disagreements with your cousins. It was that kind of a thing. And so I really enjoyed my time, and I used to drive my car down to, which is kind of funny. I built a 1977 Datsun 280Z, a little sports car. I used to drive that thing, 28 hours from Calgary to Bakersfield, and I love driving through the mountains, like Montana at night on a summer night. There's so much to like about the U.S. And I was treated so well. My wife and I, when we were living in White Rock near the American-U.S. border, we used to go down all the time into Washington. And again, it's like we're cousins and we got along really well. And that's the basis for the Canadian American relationship. I mean, plenty of us had many Canadians. We have family down there, we have friends down there, snowbirds, winter down there to get away from the Canadian cold. I mean, we are a North American family, and you are our cousins, we're your cousins. And up to now, we've got along really, really well. That brings us to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, I did an episode here and I said, look, man, either he's stupid, he's a liar, or he's a stupid liar. It's one of those three, maybe it's all three. Because this is first of all, disrespecting Canada and calling us the 51st state and calling our then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau the governor of the great state of Canada, that kind of stuff. Guy, that's really disrespectful. No other world leader. I mean, maybe, Vladimir Putin or, not even, I don't think the Chinese president would do that. I mean, maybe North Korea, Kim Jong-un or whatever his name is. That's, don't do that. That's really disrespectful. And you made Canadians really, really angry. But you know what's even worse is the implied threat of military invasion. What? Would you go invade your cousins for something? I mean, would you take a gun in and this is not silly nonsense. Now, no less a credible commentator than Malcolm Nance, who's a security advisor and is on American TV all the time. I subscribe to his Substack because he wrote one where he said, not only is that likely, the Pentagon has drawn up plans, and it's now only a question of when and where until the Americans, U.S. military invades Canada. Look, if it was just MAGA voters on social media, that's one thing. Put up with that. But when commentators like Malcolm Nance say, no, this is a real thing, and the plans are in the works, and we're going to, well, now we're in the position of being Ukraine to Russia, and look what happened there, and what the Ukrainians have done over the last 3+ years. I mean, so Canadians are really, really angry, and there's been a lot of polling about how we feel about annexation. And I can tell you right now, 90% of Canadians want nothing to do with it. Frankly, there was a poll out from Angus Reid here, a Canadian outfit, but they polled down in the US, and 60% of Americans don't want us to be the 51st state. There's no popular support in the US for it. And in fact, another 32% over and above the 60% said, well, only if Canada really wants to. I guess we'll consider it if Canada wants it. We don't want to. Under no circumstances do we want to give up our sovereignty. In fact, what Trump has been hinting at is illegal under the UN Charter. So, uh, the other thing I want to talk about is this business of a trade deficit, because that's, he says we're ripping the United States off. We're stealing from them. No, there's a $63 billion trade deficit that Canada has with the US has with Canada. And that's because you buy more stuff from us, like the oil, where you make money on it, than we buy from you. Well, you're 10 times our economy. I'm surprised we buy as much stuff from you as we do. And that's it. There are no subsidies involved here whatsoever. And I can't tell you how many economists, both American and Canadian, I read or watched them explain why that's not the case. And this is not like sophisticated stuff. This is like economics 101. I mean, Trump went to the Wharton School of Business in Pennsylvania. How can you not know this? And how can you ignore? Well, of course, this is just a pretext, right? It's the same thing with the claims that fentanyl and illegal aliens are flowing across the border from Canada into the United States. American statistics show that it was 19 kilograms, that's I think is about 48 pounds of fentanyl last year were seized at the US border. Because remember, if it's coming from Canada into the US, then it's the Americans' job to stop it. It's not our job. Our job is to keep stuff from coming into the US into Canada. In fact, the flow of fentanyl and other drugs into Canada from the US is far greater than the flow of drugs into the US from Canada. If anybody has a complaint here, it's us, because you've got a huge drug problem and it's flowing into Canada. It's like you have a huge problem with guns, and most of the murders that take place in Canada are with illegal guns that were obtained in the U.S. We don't threaten to invade the United States. Well, that's a kind of a ridiculous comment, isn't it? No, Canada's not going to invade anybody, least of all the U.S. But nevertheless, you get my point here. These are things we need to talk about. We need to negotiate. We need to figure out solutions, like between families, within the family, between the cousins. That's what we do. And that would work just fine. This lying stuff, this making up things. And Howard Lutnick, your Secretary of Commerce, did somebody drop that guy in his head when he was a baby? I mean, the stuff that comes out of his mouth is embarrassing. You ought to be embarrassed by the lies he tells. So I can't state this point emphatically enough for you, American viewers. We're really pissed. We really are. And there are a lot of smart folks in my network who are public commentators, politicians, and so on, who are saying this is a rupture. This can't be repaired. It'll never go back. Even if Trump backed off tomorrow, we don't trust you anymore. That trust has been broken and it can't be repaired. And we're going to go and now we're going to restructure our economy. So instead of being so oriented north and south, it's going to be oriented east and west. So we trade more with each other within the country. And we're going to focus on exports, maybe to like the EU, maybe into the global south. That's going to be our focus. That's not good for you. There's a lot of raw materials here in Canada, like critical minerals, for example, that you need for your battery industries and your EV industries and your super semiconductor and all sorts of high-tech industries that you've got in the US. You need those minerals. We don't want to sell them to you anymore. We want to sell them someplace else because we can't trust you. And if you can't trust the supplier, I had an economist on, Dr. Torsten Jackert from the University of British Columbia, and he said only thing that's worse than tariffs is uncertainty. And Donald Trump has created enormous uncertainty and enormous distrust. You can't have a trading relationship like that. It just won't work. You can't invade us because you're more vulnerable than we are. You, this is not good. And it's not good. It's mostly not good for you. There's going to be some dislocation on the Canadian side for a while until we get our act together. But plans are underway. We're having an election here. Could be called today. If not today, probably next week. And it's a federal election. We have a new prime minister, Mark Carney. Mark Carney was the governor of the Bank of Canada back in 2008, 2007, 2008, when they had the Great Recession. Remember when the financial system blew up in the U.S. because of your subprime mortgages, and then spread to the rest of the world? Yeah. Well, he steered the Canadian economy through that very, very well. So well, in fact, that the Bank of England came along and poached him and offered him the job of the governor of the Bank of England. And then he steered England through the Brexit, which 2016 to 2020, in that era. This guy is not only an economist, he's a very good, experienced economist. And he's been working at the international level on climate finance and investment, and he understands money. And he's got a plan, assuming that he wins the election. But so far, that he looks like the liberals have been revived under him, and he's got as good a shot as the Conservative Party. So let's assume for a moment that he wins. This is a guy that has the economic chops to do what's necessary to reorient the Canadian economy east and west, and then exporting off our coasts into international markets. Didn't have to be like this. And maybe it doesn't have to be like this. I mean, you could rescue this. The viewers that are watching this could put pressure on their representatives, on their senators, on their governors. You could call the White House, leave angry messages, say this is unacceptable. We want you to back off, treat Canada with the respect it deserves, et cetera, et cetera. And you could do that. But if you just sit on your thumbs and you do nothing and you let Donald Trump do what he is doing, then this is going to end badly for you. Not for Canada. We'll survive. We've got one of the countries with the richest mineral and natural resource endowments in the world. Timber, minerals, oil, gas, water, uh, farmland, you name it. We have what the world needs. We're going to be fine. And we'll figure this stuff out because it ain't rocket science, you know. Oh, we're going to ship things east and west and off the coast instead of north and south, and we'll add some value to it. Stuff, you know, we'll get there. You guys are going to suffer. So please, as one cousin to another, part of the family, the North American family, fix this. Go to the guy who's causing the trouble and all of his minions who are, don't take a deep breath so I don't get carried away here. Put pressure on them. Social media, around the dinner table, at the coffee shop, whatever. But make your voice heard. This is not going to work out well for you.
Thanks for watching the show. We are on a mission to reach 10,000 subscribers and over 1 million views. If you're enjoying the content, give us a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for being part of our community.